They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
That's right. Get those hands up. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of that Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, the industry's longest running cybersecurity podcast. Welcome aboard, folks. My motley crew today, and I'll start with myself and go around the horn here. Mr. Rock Lambros. Rock, good to see you again. You got to take yourself off mute before you do that, buddy.
Sorry, amateur hour. Thanks, Ralph. How you doing?
And
Thanksgiving, everyone.
For those of you guys that don't know, Rock is the co-author of the CISO Evolution book there over his left shoulder. As if you don't have a copy, you should have read it by now. To Rock's left and screen right, Mr. Jeff Collins, live and in the flesh from beautiful Las Vegas and reInvent. Hey, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on. I'm at the Lily Treasure Island, so if you've never stayed here, you get a nice view of what a room looks like.
And that's the entire room.
This is the entire room at Treasure Island, is this area that you see. It's the bed, the couch, and the desk.
Our guest of honor for this week, Mr. Marcus Carey. Hey, Marcus. It's been a while. How are you?
Hey, how you doing? I'm happy to be here. Can't wait to get into talking about all the stuff y'all want to talk about. I'm excited.
Before we do that, I love the masks over your left shoulder there. Those are cool. I'm a big fan of both Iron Man, the Black Panther there, and of course, my kid absolutely loves the bad boy character there.
That's funny. That's a talking head too. So it talks.
Oh God!
It says it's hilarious actually. If you hold it upside down, it has an accelerometer. It says, "Hey, you got me upside down." It's in Deadpool.
Oh
crazy.
God! Ryan Reynolds is a genius and a national treasure. I love that man. He is so funny. Yep. All right. Last but not least, Mr. Jim Tiller, who's now permanently part of the podcast, as you guys can hear in the intro. Welcome, Jim.
I'm still getting used to it. That's pretty exciting. Do I look different? I think I gained 20, 30 pounds a little bit this past week. It's amazing. But
I think all of us did that.
Yeah, a little bit on the stuffed side, no pun intended. So good to be here, man.
All right, so this all started. This is a timely show. Marcus dropped a provocatively titled article on LinkedIn, which I love. You got to have a good hook, and it's called "Artificial Intelligence Doesn't Care About Black People." And I'd love to kick that off by tell us what that means. I'll put a link to the article in the show notes, but Marcus, kick us off. Tell me what that means. Why you wrote that?
There's definitely some clickbait situation going on there.
No,
but it was a conversation starter for sure, because I think a lot of people. I've been trying to play around with AI for years now. Definitely the last 2 years, been playing with LLMs and all that stuff. And AI is all over the place. And one of the things you can't get away with, you can't get away from the whole bias conversation. And so, even though that was a provocative title, what I'm talking about is like you just need a lot of people in the room when these things are being happening in the first place. And it's like with me, I gave a good example of trying to, because I'm a light-skinned Black person, and to get AI to try to generate like the image generation, to get it to generate a light-skinned Black person is very hard. Funny enough, you have to give it a lot of examples. You got like honey complexion, all this stuff. But if you say Black in it, it's a dark-skinned Black person every time. and it's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like, wow, I can't make somebody looks like me. It's hard. And even my daughter was trying to do some TikTok challenge where you get AI to do something and she couldn't get it to look like her.
Oh, good
So
Lord.
and I don't have it, but it's a bigger issue where even like, we're all in cybersecurity, and what I see people building cybersecurity systems. Like, there's no cybersecurity people that are involved in a lot of these conversations because they're putting AI in all kind of different use cases. And again, I mean, even in the situation where people talk about bias, it doesn't like black people, it just wasn't black people in the training data. There probably wasn't a black designer. There wasn't black early users. And the same thing with cybersecurity. A lot of these cybersecurity tools, they don't have they think that cybersecurity can do something, but it's all about context, and you have to have some kind of expertise, some subject matter expertise when building these systems. And so that's what the article is about.
Wasn't there a God? This must have been a bit ago when the TSA was doing the facial recognition stuff. There was something about Asian faces were basically being misdetected terribly. Why? Because there had been nobody that had thought about the facial structure of some Asian cultures being physically distinct, and nobody had nobody that sat in that room and went, that algorithm isn't going to work for everybody, right? And so it's your typical cyber thing where you've got a bunch of, let's face it, people that look like us, right? I mean, generally older, generally educated, generally like in this small bubble where the result that all the other people, right, the rest of the world population does not look and does not talk and does not think like this group. And so you've got this representation problem.
Yeah, in the early days of Clearview, remember Clearview and law enforcement? And there was a huge issue with specifically black people, Marcus, and misidentification, which is an example that you mentioned in your article, as a matter of fact, right? It's a huge issue. And then so you have the situation where you have people who are training a certain way, to Ralph's point, and then you have different collections of data that's available to even train on, right? So it becomes biased just because of the volume of data. But your point about security, I think, is dead on, because if we all understand there's different types of people, and as humans we recognize that's innate, right? But what is not innate is understanding like security issues and trying to build that into a model. You're going to have your own perspective or any kind of theorem that you've created around security be in your model. You're dead spot on.
Well, I think one of the parts that's interesting about that, Jim, is when you think about security and you think about, any type of algorithm or the bias that we talk about here, one of the things that's really hard is that, anytime you leverage anything that's algorithmic, it doesn't deal with exceptions well. We see this. If you take, one of the biggest things all of us saw in the last year was we saw the Paris Olympics. If you think about data in Paris or in France holistically prior to the Olympics, data was at a certain level, data volumes, data throughput, all those types of things, security threats, the types of security threats that were hitting the area. When things change drastically, that's what breaks things. One of the parts that's interesting, I'm sitting out here at AWS reInvent, and it's one of the things that, when I walk the floor, it's always kind of interesting to talk to all these vendors, because every vendor that's using AI is doing it in this like known normal behavior. They go in and they think about it in this known normal ecosystem, and they're looking for exceptions within that realm. Well, the problem is in cloud is we're always dealing with exceptions. People spin up and they spin down services. They deploy net new services. They deploy brand new workloads. And the core functions of these algorithms and this bias, whether it's an LLM or generative or whatever it is, doesn't really matter. All those pieces can't deal with those components. And so it's kind of to walk the floor and talk to people about AI, and you talk to them about what's going on, and they just kind of like stare at you. Like, AI can't solve that. And there's just like this look of like you basically like killed their kitten or something. It's a terrible realm.
ultimately, I mean, whether it's detecting a person, detecting behavior, I think it's the interesting place to look at it applied is in physical security systems. There's a lot that research that's been done on video surveillance, right, and AI analysis of video surveillance, and purely based on the way a person behaves in terms of how they dress, how they walk, body gestures, gait, that kind of thing is different culturally and different based on where you are. And I'm kind of curious. I've not heard a lot happening from that space. So, I'm super curious. There's a comic that talks about like everybody's inherent bias, right? If you're in, say it's 2:00 in the morning and you're at a gas station, you're you're pumping gas in a neighborhood you don't know, and he goes and looks at the audience and goes, "This is good. This is you." He goes, "You don't have to admit it to me or not." He goes, "There are two people approaching you. One's a dirty man, kind of hunched over, walking slowly. The other one is a person in a nice trench coat and a fedora." He goes, "Which one do you feel safer with?" And then he goes, "Yeah, that's what I thought, right?" And you're like, "But you don't know anything about these people other than how they look in that moment." He goes, "That guy could have had a weapon underneath, and the other guy could have just happened to have tripped and fallen, and now he's trying to get back up." Because so you don't know anything about it, but your mind immediately goes there. And I can't help but think that as we, do like video, right? Think about training video data at an airport or at any big events, sporting events, entertainment venues, to look for suspicious people. Like, how do you train the data on that? What do you, how do you find outliers? And how do you keep our inherent biases as human beings, right? Because we don't do it. Sometimes we don't do it on purpose. Sometimes it's just the way you think, right? We've seen too many movies. You've watched too many news programs, whatever. And you have these inherent biases that I can't imagine don't translate into code and don't translate into potentially bad situations for absolutely no reason other than that exists in the system.
Well, Rap, that's exactly why in the EU AI Act, in the Colorado Senate bill that passed, the nation's first AI bill, what Utah looks like, what New York City's bill looks like, what California's eventual bill looked like, all these types of physical security facial recognition systems are classified as high risk, right? Because kind of back to everybody's point so far, circling around it, the algorithm is only good as the data that it is trained on. If you look at the pioneer models, right, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Geminis of the world, they were largely trained by academia early on, and who predominantly, Ralph, a little bit to your point earlier, who predominantly makes up academia? Liberal-minded white males. Right, so kind of back to your cultural aspects of it, of not considering, specific and unique Asian facial features, not considering light-skinned Black people, or weighing the data accordingly. That's exactly why these systems are classified as high risk, right? If you go back to the, and I replied to Marcus's original post about Amazon recognition back in 2018. Now, granted, this was 6 years ago. But the ACLU what's that?
And yet.
I mean, I wouldn't say, I think we made progress. There's still a lot of work to go. I don't think our biases are as egregious, right? But the ACLU they did an experiment that revealed the recognition incorrectly matched 28 members of U.S. Congress with mugshots in a database of 25,000 publicly available arrest photos. And 80% of, I believe it was 80%, or no, I'm sorry, 40% of those matches were people of color, while people of color only represent 20% of the individuals in Congress, right? And it ran through all, whatever it is, 535 members of Congress, right? So you saw that like disproportionate bias towards individuals of color and matching them with mugshots. like I said, we're better now, but not that much. We've made progress, but I don't know how you completely. I mean, the second you tell me how to take bias out of humans, then we can talk about taking bias out of AI, right? And I think
that's
it's
the
just
thing, right?
Yeah, it's an issue just like from a cybersecurity risk management perspective and layered defenses. We've got to put in layered mitigation strategies to be able to monitor and detect for that bias.
I remember I was watching, there's a bunch of really good research that was done on this. I don't remember the conference I was at, but there was a professor that was presenting on something called snow crash. It is essentially using and manipulating pixels inside of real images to make it look like, to make the algorithm think it's something else. And basically, like, you can make a stop sign, manipulate a stop sign into a teddy bear or a banana. And I thought that was bonkers until he demoed it. But he started with an example that made me laugh, and then it's never left my brain since. And he said, ages ago, they were training a computer algorithm. This is, I think, before the words AI were really public, in the public conscious. But they were training it. The U.S. intelligence services were training it on satellite data to locate Russian tank movements, right? And so they put thousands and thousands of photos of Russian tanks, and then they put it through a trial run and realized something. They had taught the AI to identify snow. Because while the tanks were all different types, the thing that was constant was snow.
Yeah.
So, like, that hasn't left my brain, because we are ultimately there's in a quest. Like, think about it when they said, and Marcus, maybe this one's for you from a research angle. Think about when somebody said, "Oh, we're going to use, we're using all publicly available data, including like social media and stuff." Like, I immediately went, "Wait, you're going to use social media for training data? I don't know if I want that."
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
I think a couple of things. I don't think, I think bias has a bad name, by the way, too, right? And if you're talking about outcomes, sometimes you want things to be biased. For instance, if you're making something to recognize snow, and I know that bias is always used in a negative connotation, but the truth is there are people, and I remember a long time, Raph, like I remember you actually got assaulted in Chicago, I believe, a long time ago. Am I right? Do I remember that correctly?
I don't know if that was. I mean, maybe it was a long time.
I'm pretty sure.
Maybe.
The only thing I got going for is my memory. But I remember you got somebody. I think you got assaulted in Chicago. I remember that story. Do you live in Chicago?
I used to. I live in Chicago for a long time.
Cool. But I'm saying, like, what the point that I'm getting at here, though, is what happens with people, right? Is that we're prediction machines, right? That's all we do. We predict everything. We're predicting everything. I'm predicting the room around me right now. And that's how we can notice if something happens, right? If there's something out of place, or if it's a shady looking character coming down the street. So I think all of those things are good. And it sucks, and I'm black and I can say this, y'all can't say this. If I see it, sometimes I'm gonna be biased if I see somebody that look like they're from a low income area in the wrong place, and I'm gonna feel some kind of way, and that sucks. But it is what it is. And so I think that sometimes we can get in trouble, and people can get in trouble for saying that sometimes it's okay. Being biased sometimes will save your life, is what I'm saying, right? And so
that's a fair point.
But I mean, and you could say it's a bias or whatever, but I mean, it is what it is. But what I want to challenge people to do, I just want to get more people working on these systems and all that. Most of the stuff you see that says AI in it, and Jeff didn't call it out, but it's just BS most of the time. It's straight up.
I think we just know that.
I think the fine line is, Marcus, is like, where is the line between biased and educated guesses, for lack of a better term, based on our wealth of knowledge and experience, right? And, bias is almost like, to me, like the unintentional side of it, whereas the educational guess point is, right, like we have all this experience in our lives, And we as humans have guts, right? And maybe we have good gut feelings, maybe we have bad gut feelings, but where is that line? And then how do you translate that to AI? Like, I am not the one to answer that question.
But see,
but sorry, go ahead, Raph. Go ahead.
no, I'll give you my personal example. When it comes to learned experience, right? So Marcus, your example, I'll give you a less controversial one, like the Nope noodles, right? Snakes. I've got plenty of friends that have really cool snakes, and I saw one that somebody, like, we were walking on a tour in a tropical rainforest, and I was like, oh, that's cool, and somebody had to yell, like, that will kill you, run. And I was like, oh, never getting near snakes again. Like, that's all that comes to mind now. Like, fight or flight, full on. Like, you can show me the nicest, cuddliest snake, and I'll be like, no. No.
I think Rock also hit something in your story. Remind me of this, Raph. Is Rock hit it when we talk about there's one is we're trying to. He said, like, humans got to fix bias first before AI, right? So we keep sort of looking at bias as, to Marcus's point, it's a negative thing appearing in AI, but we actually have 3 problems that introduce just being human and creates bias, right? We can't avoid it. We spoke about that earlier. So we're taking a potentially biased person just because of their experiences, like Rap was talking about. Then we have the computational process of building algorithms where we insert that. But that is a technical challenge in of itself, right? How you train. And then we have the third dimension, or the third leg of the stool, which is the data that you're using. And some of the early challenges with this, especially if we go back to the original article, Marcus, you wrote, where you started off with, is there were just, if you took every picture on the internet, you would get essentially, a reflection, a similar curve to the percentage of population of a given race, right? So there would be just less pictures of this type of person, or more pictures of this type of person, if you're just looking at photographs, kind of thing, which is an early analysis that came from the Clearview issues from, like, in the late 2017, 2016 period. So we're sitting here talking about something really difficult to do just as a highly intelligent human being, and then we're adding all the other dimensions. And I think if we don't put major energy into this, right? So every piece of data that you're teaching something with, it needs to be analyzed for a degree of completeness, right? So if you don't have pictures of Asian people and pictures of Black people, pictures of white people equally, male and female, and every version in between of all that, you're going to, no matter how good you try to write that algorithm and make it biased and make it stable in that sense, to your point earlier, I think, Marcus, is that you're just putting bad data in. And what's interesting is everybody's rushing to cram data in right now so fast that they're not thinking about what you're training. We talk about what we're going to have our kids read and watch on TV, right? It's kind of like we have to think in sort of the same way when it comes to training. Otherwise, we're going to continue to perpetuate this cycle, and it's going to get bad. It's going to get bad, not better. We have to get on top of it now.
Well, and I think one of the things that's important about what you said, Jim, and what you said as well, Marcus, is, we have an opportunity not to have this happen anymore. In Marcus's example is he's trying to arbitrage risk. As humans, we only have so much data, and bias exists for us because it's fight or flight. I mean, if you think about, just from, a nature component, let's not even move into nurture. If we simply just think about fight or flight, we're thinking about ways that we can possibly arbitrage our risk. What can we do to mitigate that? And one of the things is, if you see someone, in Marcus's example of this lower socioeconomic person, in your mind, you have this belief that that's a higher risk. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the higher risk that you have. When we think about algorithms, though, we don't necessarily have to do that. And my point about this is, when we train with large amounts of data, we have a choice to train with large amounts of data that have a bias. If we show it tons and tons of data, we show it, 1,000 pictures of the United States, a city in the US, and we tell it that this is every single city in the world because we send it 1,000 pictures. That was our choice. We instituted that bias. If we take security data and we send it 10 million great data points. Let's say we train it with NetFlow data, and we train very crystal clean NetFlow data. It's not terribly written. It's not, all the stuff that we deal with. You're going to create that bias. We have to collectively, regardless of who we are, we have to choose to do it right. Like, we don't have to do those things. And algorithms, like I hear this all the time from people. Well, algorithms, you can't write this perfect algorithm. You don't have to write a perfect algorithm. Algorithms are algorithms. There's no such thing as a perfect algorithm. Leverage any algorithm you want. If you train it correctly and you train it with the right data, it's going to give you an outcome you want. If you're constantly searching for perfection, I think all of us are going to be sad at the end.
So do we have a data problem, boys? Like, is it? I guess I want to try to figure out work with me. If I say we're not trying, these people that are writing these algorithms are not trying to be biased, they're not trying to be bad. It's a side effect of something they've done. Yeah. So is it an algorithm? Maybe not, Jeff. Jeff's saying probably not, though, right? So is it the algorithm that's written poorly to learn based on input data, or is the data that's being pushed through the algorithm to create the model that it then works off?
Yeah. Ralph, I firmly believe it's a data problem, but it's not just a data problem necessarily, right? The data is the data. We have a lot of data. It's, the balance between the cost to go through that data, feature engineer that data, clean up that data, make sure that all things are represented equally, or whatever weights you want to put in place for different variables, balancing that and the costs around it to speed of market. Speed to market, right? So it's, yes, we have a metrics of tons of data, right? And it's just that we are not taking the time, and you've got to balance risk with innovation, right? Like, we would sit here, it's like saying, perfect security. Like, we have spent a decade as security professionals telling security people to get out of the way and work with the business and not be the department of no, but be the department of how. It's the same thing with the data problem and training the algorithms and pushing things out to market. It's no different in that regard, right? So it's up to us, I think, as security professionals and data privacy professionals, to educate organizations on, or at least identifying what that balance is for that organization.
I would say, as long as AI as an algorithm is not making potentially life and death decisions, that's fine. But however, we have autonomous vehicles. We have all types of autonomous vehicles trying to get to the market right now. And
it's going to be a different risk profile for different applications, right?
Yeah. But here's what I'm thinking, though. They're obviously, the designers of these things are obviously pushing vast amounts of video and probably audio from driving around on a street on a daily basis from a busy city, a rural neighborhood, and whatever, right? Different countries, different places, to represent people and road cones and cattle and motorcycles and all sorts of manner of things you might encounter on the road. How do you get to a point, and this is like why I will not get into in a self-driving car for this one reason, and that how do you, with an amount of certainty that is equivalent to like that is commensurate with the loss of life potentially, say this is good enough? Like, we've shown it enough data, and it's pretty good data, right? And you're not sending it 1,000 pictures. You're not sending it 5 hours of video. You're sending it hundreds of thousands. Are you telling me that human beings have watched that? Diverse human beings from different cultures, different languages, different perspectives, different educations, all this, to give that to somebody that to find that one person will say, wait a minute, you've forgotten to account for something that people in, I don't know, what's the made-up country from Dilbert, that place, right? They wear road cones on their heads, but those are people. So how do you distinguish between that and a road cone? Like, you see what I'm saying? How do you get to that, like, good enough?
Well,
But you
I
know,
mean, let me ask this, right? I think to your specific example, the reason why we don't have widespread autonomous vehicles is because we're expecting perfect outcomes. But should we, from a safety perspective, rather should we be striving for better outcomes from a road safety and hazard perspective, right? So is an increase, or I guess a decrease in injuries and deaths due to road incidents, a 1% increase good enough, a 5% increase good enough, a 20% increase good enough? I don't know. I don't know what that number is. But I think the reason why we don't have more widespread usage of autonomous vehicles, of their autonomous technologies, whatever, is because we're always looking for perfect solutions. And to Jeff's point, there's no perfect algorithm.
I just don't want to get run over by it. Albonia is the country we were looking for.
but Rafal, I mean, the reason why you have more hesitancy to get into a self-driving car is because none of your children have reached the ripe age of 15 and a half yet. Once your children have reached 15 and a half, you'll get in any vehicle. It could be a North Korean designed autonomous car. I'm like, good enough. I'll go in it. Sign me up right now. Because that is safer than riding with your 15 and a half year old child on the highway as they're going down the road and hitting random pedals and you believe you're going to die. So I'm pretty much good with anything.
Mute, Marcus. Seems like you hit mute.
Yeah, I think the main reason that we don't see autonomous vehicles because we live in a country that people will sue you for everything, and
That's also true.
that I don't think
fair.
I think that what's going to have to happen, and this may happen in the next administration, is that I think that they're going to have to stifle lawsuits against the technology because it's not going to happen unless that happens. So that's what it's going to happen. I'm pretty confident that the next administration will roll back some of the safety concerns or the safety laws, and you won't be able to sue. I've seen stuff like that in Texas, where even like the governor of Texas got hit by a tree. He sued. I don't know if you heard this story. That's why he's in a wheelchair. But he sued and won millions of dollars from a guy in a gardening company, and then he signed legislation later to say that it's illegal. You have to cap the amount of you can sue him for, right? So what I see is that, and mark my words and come back to this podcast, we're going to see legislation that says that you can only sue for so much money if something happens in autonomous vehicles. There's one more funny thing that I noticed. So I don't know if y'all saw this, but there was a big thing about this is so funny to me because the whole thing about we say that who's designing these systems and what do they think, who do they think a black person looks like and all that stuff. Well, there's this 60-minute article just came out, or it was on 60 Minutes, where they were training people because there's human feedback on all these LLMs and all these different systems now. And so what they're doing is they're paying people in countries, English-speaking countries, people that speak English, and like some Africans are actually doing the human feedback. And so I was like, why do all these black people look like Africans? Well, it's because the people that are saying this is what a black person looks like to them is they're African. And so that was like, wow, it's not a white person doing this human feedback. It's somebody in Africa. And to them, a black person looks darker skinned than me. And so that just blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's crazy that I just wrote that article like last week, 2 weeks ago or something like that. And then I see this whole controversy and they're complaining, and they were complaining because they're overworked and they say they're not making a lot of money. I think that in a lot of cases like that, to be honest with you, I think that you can't compare American wages to another, a third world country or some country. I mean, sometimes it might seem like it's not a lot of money to us, but if you've been overseas, if you've been to a different country, you know how far, our money goes when we go over there.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, I don't want people to be working in sweatshops or nothing like that. But I think that the human feedback thing, and for everybody that hasn't been really into this, the human feedback has really flipped the script, and that's what's made all these LLMs really good and all this new technology. and I'm here for it. I love the technology. What I do like is I like understanding the limitations of the technology, right? Because I like push it to the limits, see what it does well, see where it's biased. I'm all for that. But sometimes when I see people saying, "Oh no, AI totally sucks" and all that, I don't believe that either. I believe that when people are applying AI to stuff, they're doing the wrong applications in some cases. That's what the key is. You got to know when to use it, and that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing a bunch of stuff. Wisdom is being able to apply that knowledge to real life in real life situation.
Oh, and on that note, that's the end of the show right there, because that's the nugget of wisdom from Marcus. I like it. All right, this has been fun. We could probably do this again. Listen, if there's legislation, Marcus, that does this, I hope they. Never mind. I'll get in trouble for politics. Anyway, this has been fun. I hope. My hope is that we are very deliberate and very thoughtful about the things that we don't normally think about, and that means taking the work you've done, giving it to somebody that is culturally, ethnically, intellectually, completely not like you, and having them review it and go, "Hey, you know what you didn't think of?" Because I think that's where we get Elbonians that wear road cones on their heads as a use case. I sneak in Dilbert in whatever I can, guys. That's just how it goes. All right, Marcus, thanks for being on the show, bud. Good article. I wish you luck on the endeavor. It sounds like you're going to jump into that. So feel free to come back and let us know how it's going.
Yeah, I'll definitely love to come back. I think we need to get more cybersecurity people into AI and helping build these systems instead of letting other people do it. No matter what your specialty is,
that's fair.
Get into it. Bring your expertise to the table.
That's fair. All right, cool. Rock, Jeff, Jim, Marcus, thanks so much. Folks, thanks for listening. I hope you get a chance to watch the YouTube stream of this. If not, at least listen to it as a podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Ciao, y'all.